Hello everyone, welcome to another Tekken Guide, and in this video I want to talk about the differences between beginner level, intermediate, and high level. Okay, let's start by explaining that beginner's level of play is generally very aggressive. Beginners, they usually like to swing a lot. This is also because most beginners, they don't understand the concept of punishable move. Most beginners, they don't know that a power crush is punishable. Most of the times because the opponent doesn't punish them, so they don't know, or they think they can get away with that, right? And why not spamming a move like a power crush if no one punishes it? Because it's a great move. It absorbs attacks, it only takes like 6 or 7 frames to activate the armor, and it knocks down, into advantage, right? So it's a great move. But of course, the trade-off is that the move is punishable. But most beginners, they don't grasp that concept, or they just hope they can get away with that. And mainly, most of the times they do, because the opponent doesn't punish them. And that is not always their fault. Sometimes it's hard to react. When you're a beginner, it's hard to react to a single hitting move like a power crush. You block it, and I've been there, I know. You block it, and by the time you block the move, you say, oh, it's that move, it's power crush, I need to punish, and it's over. Your opponent is already recovering, and you can't do anything. So it's of course extremely difficult to punish if you're a beginner, especially single hitting moves like down for twos, hop kicks, power crushes. But eventually, you will get there. But in beginner level, most beginners, they feel confident about swinging. They don't get punished, and they like to be aggressive. Because another important aspect of the beginner level of play is that the neutral is basically non-existent. The neutral doesn't exist in beginner level, because the neutral is created through movements. The neutral is the mutual respect between me and my opponent, and that respect is created by using movements. You know that I'm gonna sidestep if you try to overextend. Or you could also use neutral tools, like stuff like, for example, Kodasuro back 1 with Brian, these like electrics with Mishimas, these type of attacks, which are great in the neutral. This demon pause. But in beginners, you mostly don't use those attacks, you don't know how to sidestep, so the neutral is basically non-existent. So it's all about being aggressive, it's all about overwhelming the opponent with your offense, rather than being overwhelmed by the opponent's offense. And most beginners, they most of the times they don't try to apply their character's main 50-50. What's the main 50-50, for example, for a character like Brian? His main 50-50 is hatchet kick, right? This is your best low, and this is the low that you want to try to apply. But this low is pretty slow, and you're not gonna be able to go into your opponent's face and do this in beginners, because they're not gonna allow you to do that. So what a beginner is gonna try to look for in the move list is something that can allow them to create pressure quickly without risking too much with slow swings, right? So most beginners, they usually try to use 2 different options. They can either try to resort to long strings, like Brian, like this types of strings, right? This types of strings, and hope that you don't know when you can press or you can't press, and you just get counter hit randomly, right? Stuff like this. Long strings, 3-hit strings, 4-hit strings. You don't know when to press, and you get blown up, right? That's the first strategy for beginners. And then the next idea that you might try to apply is to use something that I like to refer as a fake 50-50 or a cheap 50-50. what a fake 50-50 is basically something like Brian's down for 2-1, you hold back and you're going to backswing. And from there, you can apply hatchet kick. So what you're doing here is you're using a very fast poke, 13 frames, mid-high. Most people in beginners can't duck the second hit. Absolutely not. And if you do this, you're going to backsway. Most people will respect you because they don't know what you're doing. And you apply hatchet kick. And now you can start to pressure your opponent, right? And if they try to press a button, most cases they will not be able to do it quickly enough, and you can counter it with this. If they try to press a button, if this counter hits, you get a launch, right? So, or another example with Brian would probably be 1, 2, 3. You do this, pa, pa, pa. You use a 10 frames high J-Link string, and you force the opponent to block. And then you apply your 50-50. Am I gonna go with the mid, or with the low or the mid? Because I also have 1-2-1, which ends with a mid. And you're there guessing, right? So this is what beginners love. Usually any type of move, any type of string that will transition into a stance, and a stance that can allow you to pressure the opponent is usually very, very good. In the case of Dragunov, even something like 2-1, right? 2-1 on block, it's very useful. You're going to sneak, and then you start to pressure, right? Or something like, for example, another good option would be something like Dragunov's 4-4. This is something that it's a type of attack that Victor also has, Jun also has, those pretty fast strings that will end with either a high or a mid plus on block. And then you can start your offense. Jun also has that. He has the homing high, that's +6 on block. Victor has 2-2-2 into handgun. These type of strings are very, very useful for beginners because they're quick, they're fast, and then they allow you to get plus frames and begin your offense, or they give you the ability to 50-50 the opponent, like Brian's 1-2-3 or 1-2-1. Of course, these are, I call them fake 50-50s because there is a gimmick behind them, like you can counter them. You generally can duck the high and launch, but it's generally or maybe you can fuzzy guard both mid and low option, but you generally need to be very, very good to be able to do that. They're fake, but it's actually very hard to defend against them. For example, in the case of Dragunov 4-4, that can be interrupted in between. You can jab Dragunov in between and float him. And I see that this move is being used more and more by beginners, and I can see that because more and more players are ready when this move comes out. Not to float you, but they definitely know the situation. They usually always duck because the classic float chart with low-level Dragunov players is 4-4 into full crouch down for 1-4, right? You get the plus frames, and then you start to mix up the opponent. But this wasn't a thing in Tekken 7 because Dragunov, first off, 4-4 was +3 instead of +5, and you didn't have full crouch down for 1-4. You didn't have that. You didn't have any low from full crouch, and you couldn't even throw like you can do now. This is something that they added for Tekken 8. This wasn't a thing in Tekken 7. You couldn't throw. You needed to crouch cancel into a throw. But these are, like I explained, the best strings for beginners. So they either try to recap. They either try to use long strings and hope that you don't know when the string is gonna end, and they hope to counter it you. Or they try to go with these fake 50-50s, strings that will they are fast and they transition into a stance, where they can pressure you with that. Or just strings like Dragonoff's 4-4, Jun 1-2-2, homing high, +6 on block. Most people can't duck that, so they get plus frames for free. Without taking too many risks. You usually start with a very fast poke string, right? So that is basically beginner level, right? So it took 10 minutes to get to intermediate. But like I already kinda explained when I talked about beginners, intermediate is basically when you start to apply sidestepping. It's when you start to apply sidestepping and you start to apply neutral tools to basically evade your opponent's offense, so he can't overextend as easily as when he was in beginner ranks, right? He needs to be more careful because you know how to sidestep, you know how to kill him if he tries to overextend, if he tries to play more aggressively. Or you can keep him at bay with attacks with strong neutral tools, like for example for the back one with Brian, Demon Paws, these type of attacks, 3+4. You keep him at distance with these attacks, and then the opponent has two choices. He has two options. He can either try to adapt, or he dies, basically, because if you know what you're doing, there is no way he can counter this strategy of sidestepping and neutral control. It doesn't matter how aggressive Tekken 8 is. These techniques are still insanely strong, and very few characters can actually get around that and being so oppressive with low-level strategies that can even blow up intermediate players. Just go take a look at Nina in Tekken 7. Nina in Tekken 7 was a nightmare, was an absolute nightmare. As strong as Nina is in Tekken 8, I think she's a little bit less cheap than Tekken 7 Nina. Tekken 7 Nina was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But that's basically intermediate, right? So that's basically intermediate movements and neutral. When you get to a point where both you and your opponent are respectful of each other, and you don't try to always attack, but you try to bait attacks with fake, like almost like what's the word? I'm not a huge basketball fan, but like a pump fake. You kinda you do a fake, like you do a dash just to see what your opponent does, how he reacts, and then you try to alter your strategy around that, and you try to catch him off guard. But that is basically intermediate. And then you basically get to high level. In my opinion, high level is pretty much mostly about matchup knowledge. And in my opinion, you can easily be high level against certain characters, but against other characters, you're not, because you don't have that knowledge. Against a character like, for example, Brian, against a character like, for example, Kazuya, they are very popular, they are not too complicated to understand, and you can very quickly understand how these characters operate, almost as good as the guy that is playing them. You know how they operate, and you know almost all the mini interactions between you and your opponent. You know almost all the tendencies that these players have when they apply moves. For example, Mishimas, they like to do electric into another electric, so you try to duck you try to predict when the electric is gonna come out. All of these small interactions, that is, in my opinion, is high level. When you kinda have a really good understanding of your opponent's character, but also your opponent's tendencies. General tendencies, of course. Like most Mishimas, they like to play the same. They like to do the same kind of flowcharts. Like not flowcharts, but they have the same tendencies. Most Mishimas, when they do an electric, they like to follow up with another electric, especially Kazuya players. They like to do that. electric into another electric. And once you start to understand that, you can try to duck the second electric and punish them. So, but this, of course, is for characters like, for example, Kazuya and Brian, characters that are very popular and kinda easy to understand. But when it comes to characters like, for example, Kuma, characters like Victor, for example, these characters are very complicated, they're very rare, very rare. I don't even remember the last time I played against a Victor in my region. They're very complicated, very rare, and when you play against those characters, it almost feels like you're back to intermediate, because you don't know those characters. So high level, in my opinion, because of this reason, high level is basically matchup knowledge. It's all about matchup knowledge and knowing, understanding your opponent's character, understanding the tools that your opponent is going to try to apply. I know that Brian players, they love to use back one as an approach tool because they use that against me. So I quickly, and I labbed the character extensively, and I know what every single tool, what's the purpose of every single tool. Even though now I'm starting to play Brian more, but I can do this with a lot of other characters, but not with every character, because there are some characters that are very rare and complicated. Xiaoyu, Hwoarang, you name it, Victor, these characters, they're very complicated. It's gonna take way more time to get comfortable. And so honestly, sometimes with certain characters, you really need a sparring partner because they're so complicated. You need to play against them constantly. And this is why, you know, arcades were so good back in the days, because, you know, you had sparring partners and you could just train against every single character. And then I guess we could tackle like pro level of play a little bit. The difference is that in pro level, you try to take as minimal risks as possible. You try to play super compact and safe, and it's basically almost only about pokes. It's basically only about pokes. And think about, for example, JDCR playing Dragunov. How many times you see JDCR doing sidestep into 3-1? Why doesn't he try to do sidestep into down for 2? That would be much more rewarding, right? You get a launch, but in a tournament setting, you want to try to stay as safe as possible, because you only have one shot. So you want to try to be as safe as possible, and the best option here after a sidestep, it's 1-1-3, because not even 4-1, because now 4-1 doesn't jail anymore. But this is a jailing string, so even if the opponent blocks the first hit, he can't duck the second hit. This is why JDCR uses this type of safe, but not just JDCR, every single top player. I mean, not every single top player, but most, you know, the best players, they play very safe and compact. It's almost Arslan Ash, for example. It's all about pokes. It's all about pokes and movements and trying to stay safe. Don't screw up. Don't throw out a punishable attack because you might lose the round. So and probably the tournament. So it's all about this: staying safe and small pokes, and trying to outsmart your opponent. Like trying to outsmart your opponent on a whole new level. Because you generally apply only pokes. So if you apply something like, I don't know, a big low, like hatchet kick, you only need to outsmart your opponent like four or five times to get around. But if you apply small pokes, you have to outsmart your opponent way more. Like you really need to get into your opponent's head. And like you also want to talk about reading your opponent's mind and knowing what he's doing, learning his tendencies, personal tendencies, not just the players, like not just the Kazuya main's tendencies, but that specific player's tendencies. What does he like to do? Of course, there would be more to say, but I think I'm gonna end the video now. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and take care.